Now, it's time to go over multi-point light setups. This is a fantastic way to basically start practicing the use of 2 and 3 light setups. And here's the thing, guys and gals. I would not recommend this technique for outdoor shoots. And the reason why is because for this type of stuff to work reliably well enough to really have a model stand in and to be able to do all these types of things, you need to be in an indoor location where you can set up stands, reflector stands with your reflectors on them. If you're outdoors, generally there's probably going to be wind. And if there's wind, it's going to knock the reflector stands over, or it's going to move them. Even if you have sandbags on them, it's going to move them around and to make it very difficult to get consistent light setups. So this is one of those fantastic techniques that's great to start practicing 2 and 3 light setups, but more often in closed environments, in environments where you don't have a lot of wind or a lot of outside kind of forces interacting. Because once we get into those type of situations, really you're going to be better off using off-camera lights because they're going to be much less prone to being moved and bumped, and they'll give you more consistency in terms of the way that they light. But let's go over this, because what we're going to do here is we're going to set up this shot where it looks like we have 2, 3, and in these bottom ones, it looks like we have straight up like 3 or 4 light setups, when in reality, it's just good positioning and then setting up lights around them. So as number 1, let's start with our tips first. You guys can look through the gear list. We'll be talking about all the gear that we're using in each one of these shots. Tip number 1, always, 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 always. And I feel like I've mentioned this probably like 10 times. Start with one light. Start with one light, get that light into the right position, and then number 2, after dialing in your camera settings and setting up your one light, then look at the image and analyze it and see where your shadows are and see what you need to manipulate and to change. Tip number 3, and tip number 1 and 2 were kind of combined. Tip number 3 is just because you can add more light doesn't mean that you have to add more light and doesn't mean that you should add more light. Look, a compelling image needs to have both highlights and shadows. If you open up all the shadows and everything is in the midtones, it's not going to look cool. It's not going to look dramatic. It's not going to look great. If you likewise leave too much in the shadows, it's not going to look great either. So it needs to have a balance between it, and it always depends on the look that you're going for. So let's go ahead and start from the top. I want to show you basically the construction of this image from start to finish, because at each one of these points, you could actually stop and say, hey, that's the look I'm going for. It's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with either of these. So starting with the top left. So all 3 on top of these, on top right here. It's with the 24mm f2.8 Mark II, our Canon 2470 right here. We're at around 63 to 70 millimeters for all of these shots. We're at 1/200 of a second at f2.8 and ISO 200. The only thing that changes between these 3 shots are the modifiers. So what do we start with? Well, remember we started with this shot before, right? When we were doing a one light silver dramatic setup, we started with this light, and this was the exact shot that we got. Okay, the same shot that we talked about earlier. So what we know is that for this shot, there's one silver reflector just being on a stand directly to the model's left side. For this next shot, look what happens here. The light, there's a little bit of light on the right side. It just opens up the shadows a little bit. Here, there's no fill. Here, there's a little bit of fill. What is that coming from? It's coming from a white V-flat. On the other side of him, we just placed a white V-flat. So basically what happens is this flash, we kick this into that silver reflector. It bounces onto him and across to that V-flat, and the V-flat kicks it back into his right side. Okay? That's great. We have a little basic 2 light setup essentially right here. Now, what happens in the other one? Look at this one. From this to this, there's some dramatic change going on, right? I've adjusted the silver a little bit, just so we get a little more kick into the face and we get a little bit more drama and everything. I've adjusted the silver just a tiny bit. We have the white V-flat on the other side, but what do we add? I added one more silver. I decided that I wanted the focus of this image to be really on his features, his core, his abs. So I put a silver reflector right around where his chest and abs are. So what that does is once I bounce into this left side, it goes in the right, we hit the entire V-flat. The V-flat kicks and fills in light onto this side, and then the silver adds additional light just into the abs. So essentially this looks like a 2 or 3 light setup, yet it's just our on-camera flash with additional light modification. Once you get this set up, if you're in the studio, you can shoot consistently and get these shots consistently every single time. One thing to keep in mind too is one of the techniques that I like to use, and by the way, if you are shooting in studio and you're shooting in dark situations like this, one thing I haven't mentioned is absolutely you can use a manual flash on your camera. But one thing that's really beneficial and it's really nice to have is the focus assist built into a full-featured flash. Because we're working in dark environments, and in dark environments, it's nice to have that feature because it helps really a lot with focus. Otherwise, you need some sort of modeling light, some sort of light just in the room to be able to get your focus, to be able to see okay. All right, so that's one nice thing about having that. So one thing that I like to do a lot is when I'm shooting, I'll have this hand just kind of guiding the flash. So let me turn this to manual real quick. And what I'll do is I'll just open my left eye. When I'm shooting, I'll open my left eye and I'll just look out to the side. So if I'm shooting this way, my subject's right there, watch. I'm just gonna keep my left eye open. I just glance to the left to make sure that this is aimed right where I need it to. And then I can get my little test and see where it's hitting. And then I simply look back and fire, okay? It's a very simple way of making sure that your flash is on point. And you can also make sure that it's either wide enough, it's tight enough in zoom, or if you need to go even further and add a grid to make sure you don't get spill anywhere. For these shots, because we're shooting in the studio, we don't want any light spill, we are using grids on the flash head, so that way it's kind of controlling it from spilling either top, front towards the model, or anywhere else. We're hitting just the reflector and it's bouncing light just the way we want it. Otherwise, the background is going to start lighting up and other areas in the image is going to start lighting up that we don't want because it's spilling out and bouncing off walls and so forth. So just remember to control your light. Use your grids. If you have a snoot, use whatever you need to control it. Make sure it goes into the primary modifier and that modifier is bouncing into the other modifiers the way you want it to. Work with one, build to two, and then if you need another third, go for that too, but whatever you need. So once that was set up, we just went ahead and we got a bunch of different shots. And one of my favorite shots is basically, once again, we have Brandon looking towards the light on that side. So that way we kind of leave the other side of his face in shadow. And had I had him turn just a little bit more, we would have even had a little Rembrandt light because we would have got a kiss of light right underneath his cheek. Or I could have pulled that silver forward just a little bit. We get a beautiful highlight along that shoulder and along the chest on this side. And then we get that nice kick right into the abs. And we have a good fill on the side so he doesn't drop completely into black like he does up here. Okay? But same thing though, this bottom left was same exact camera settings, 1/200 of a second, f2.8, ISO 200. Again, bouncing at around 1/4 to 1/8 power off of the silver plus a V flat plus a silver. Moving on to this shot. Now these two shots are gonna be part of our case study, so we'll talk a little more about it in a little bit. But essentially we placed him in front of the garage door. We opened up the garage door a little bit so we have a little background light coming in. We did something similar here, except we just flipped things around a little bit. And this is what I wanted to talk about in this video. If you want that primary modifier to be more specular and to be brighter, use a silver. If you want the primary modifier to be a little bit softer and to be not quite as bright, use a white. There's a benefit to each one depending on how you're bouncing the second and the third light. If I want the second light, this light that goes onto the abs, if I want it to be close to the same brightness as the first light, then what I can do is rather than using a silver as the first bounce, I can use a white as the first bounce. So on these two shots, we're using a white as the first bounce. And then I wanted the highlight on the abs to be closer in brightness to the shoulders. I didn't want as much discrepancy there. So I used a silver on this side. So we're catching white on the left side, and we're filling back and using silver as the fill. So white's not going to be as bright and silver's going to be brighter. So the silver's going to kick a little bit more fill. The white's going to catch a little bit less as the main light. So depending on which main modifier you use first is going to determine how the second and the third modifiers also act. So in this middle shot, what do we have? The same lens, 2470 f2.8 Mark II. This is at 70 millimeters at 1/50th of a second. Again, we're balancing for that ambient light. I'm at 1/50th of a second because I want some of that ambience, some of the background of that garage door to kind of pick up there. We're at f2.8 and ISO 400. We're flashing at 1/2 to 1/4 power, okay? We're using a V flat with a silver bounce to kick into his abs. And also for these shots, we also used a fog machine. We used the Roscoe Mini V. It's like a $450 fog machine. It's absolutely fantastic for indoor sets and for rooms where you just want to add a little bit of ambience to it. You just don't want it to look so kind of contrasty where the shadows and everything, it just kicks up a little bit of that ambience, a little bit of that smoke. And sometimes I like to use it where it looks like smoke. Sometimes I like to use it where it's just like this. It just looks like a little bit of ambience where it catches and picks up more light so the background doesn't fall to this pure crushed black, okay? Looks absolutely fantastic. Same thing with Levi in this shot. That V flat's off to this side. I have him turn his back towards it so we can kind of focus on his arm, and he's doing curls right now. I want him to focus on his arm, and then we get a nice kick into the abs to show detail and definition. We're not lighting the face in these shots, guys. We're not lighting the face here, here, or here. These aren't about the face. It's about features. It's about muscle definition. It's about the body. When I'm not lighting the face intentionally, I try not to bring the eyes to the camera because generally the face is not lit correctly. When you look at it, it's going to look kind of scary. So I want the attention to be away from the eyes, away from the face. He's looking down, kind of focused on lifting that curl. He's looking down, focused again on the weights. He's looking away from the camera. This shot up here, he's looking at the camera simply for illustrative purposes. This is the actual shot that I would use from this set or shots like that. So just remember, when you're lighting for these different features, you might want to pose them in ways that it's still flattering, basically. If you have them looking into the camera always and the face is not correctly well lit, it's going to look a little bit too scary, a little bit too dramatic. And that might be what's wrong with your image. So just have them look in different positions, have them do something that feels a little more natural. So when you look at this, and we'll talk more about the decision-making process when we got to this set, but when you look at this, it looks like there's one light right here. It looks like there's a background light behind the garage coming in. It looks like there's a backlight on him that's lighting his edge up over here. It looks like there's a background light going against the garage to kind of light up the background. It looks like there's a fill along the entire side of his body on the right, and it looks like there's another brighter light over here in the center of the core. Same thing with this image. Look, there's a rim light along this side. We have a little bit of hair light. We have background light, everything. It looks like it's a 4 or a 5 light setup. It's one single on-camera flash, okay? All of these were actual professional shoots. I want to mention this because if I weren't confident enough in using these techniques on an actual professional shoot with actual models who intend to use these images, then I feel like these techniques are kind of pointless. Like what, you're only going to use them, you know, for when you're messing around or something like that. No, these are fantastic techniques that you can use anywhere. But I would say that if you're going to use multi-point bounce setups, do it indoors because you don't want wind and things blowing and modifying those lights. You want them to stay perfectly. Those modifiers need to stay perfectly where they're at, and you need to bounce perfectly into them so that you get consistent results. And to do that, you should be indoors for that type of stuff. Hopefully this kind of opens your eyes a little bit into how much more you can expand on these techniques. And what's fantastic about this, guys, is this is light shaping. This is all lighting is, regardless of whether you're using on-camera lights with an on-camera flash, off-camera flashes, studio flashes, constant lights. It's the same thing. It's light shaping. So the techniques that we're teaching you here, we're going to take further into lighting 201 and lighting 301 as we continue. Let's go ahead and move to the next video now.